Welcome back, dudettes and dudes. I think I'm just going to shake that up every week. You never know what I'm going to call you from week to week. Because the whole dudes and dudettes thing was getting a little bit predictable. We can't really have that. Anyway, welcome to episode 115 of the podcast, 115 of The Anxious Truth. Thanks for coming by. I appreciate that you're here and giving me your time. It's always appreciated. Today we have a most excellent special guest, my friend, Dr. Bridget Cooper, Dr. B. She stopped by last week. Well, she didn't stop by. We were on Zoom. She wasn't here. But she stopped by last week. We spoke for about 30 minutes. I know you guys are going to dig this, especially those of you that I know are really struggling because maybe your past, there's some abuse, there's some trauma, there's some abusive relationships or abusive people in your past, and they have conditioned you, or your life experiences have conditioned you to look at yourself as less than, not worthy, not smart enough, not strong enough. And you're just having a tremendous amount of doubt because you've always been told that you're not capable of doing hard things. You're going to want to listen to Dr. B. She is definitely for you. Before I tell you a little bit more about her and we get into the interview, let me tell you for just a second about my book. It's called The Anxious Truth, a step-by-step guide to understanding and overcoming anxiety, panic, and agoraphobia. I am super proud of this book. It took me years to develop it, a full year and change to write it and publish it. And I set out to create basically an anxiety recovery toolkit, and feedback from everybody reading it says mission accomplished. So I'm super proud of that. It is essentially everything you've ever heard me say on social media and a podcast, just in much greater detail and laid out in a logical step-by-step sequence. So it is like taking a course in how to recover from an anxiety disorder. That's what I was hoping it would be. And as it turns out, it seems that I got that done. So that's why I keep asking you guys to check it out. It's at theanxioustruth.com/recovery guide. Every place you could get the book is listed right there. So take a few minutes, check it out for me. And if you've already got the book, you've read the book, thank you. And if you liked it, head on over to Amazon and write me a review. I would appreciate that. All right, enough of that. I'm getting better at that because I know how to do it a few times, but I got to tell you guys, it is the most uncomfortable thing for me to do. But sometimes we have to do uncomfortable things and we learn from them, right? Okay, let's talk about Dr. Bridget Cooper, my friend. Digging her. You're going to see her more in the podcast going forward. She is trained as a therapist. She's an author, a speaker, a leadership consultant. She is a professor. She's written 5 books. She's got the academic credentials. She has the experience. She has the life experience. She knows what she's talking about. This woman is the real deal. Her voice is very similar to mine in that she's very direct. She cuts to the quick. There's no fluff. She's going to tell it like it is. But if you are in that state where you are doubting yourself and you have been told, you are less than, you are not worthy, you're not strong enough, you're not capable of doing hard things, and it is an obstacle in your recovery from your anxiety problems, Dr. B is for you, and she will have none of that. Like, this is her jam, is helping people understand why they have that problem and then helping them get past that. So you're going to want to listen. I think it was a great, great, great episode. I so appreciate her taking the time to talk to us about this, and I'm excited to have her on, hopefully on a regular basis, to address this thing because I know how important it is to so many of you. So here we go. Let's get rolling. Dr. Bridget Cooper, my friend, Dr. B. I hope you enjoy it. I will see you guys at the end of the episode. And here we have the one, the only, Dr. B, Dr. Bridget Cooper, my old but now new friend. We've been connected for a little while, but we've just never really interacted until about a month ago.
Isn't that how it is on Facebook? Like, people ask me, like, we have this connection in common. When did you meet them? And I look at them like I'm 90 and have no memory of like 60 years of my life. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I was in their wedding or I've never met them. I'm not quite sure, actually. It could be either one.
Could go either way.
It could go either way. Like, I don't really know. It's probably a bad draft. Yeah.
I was either in their wedding or I've never met that person. I'm not sure which one. That's great.
Yeah. If there's anything in between on Facebook, I feel like that's what it is. But you just, yeah.
I would tend to agree. Like, I have no idea how I know this person. I have no idea how I know you, to be honest with you, but I'm glad that I do.
Yeah, we were just meant to meet. And then, and once we started having our conversation last week, we were like, how did we not have this conversation before?
Yeah. How did that happen?
I'm here today.
So let's talk about some stuff here. So the first thing I want to talk about is, here's the coolest thing. And I told you this when we first talked a couple of weeks ago. Like, I knew I had you as a Facebook friend. You'd pop up once in a while, always with this great message, always really positive. Even when like the shit is hitting the fan for you, you're always like kind of positive, which is Awesome. And the first thing that struck me when I first saw you on social media was your profile picture. You're sitting on some like giant milk crate or something with a bullwhip. Very sweet looking, and I'm sure people tell you this. You have a very sweet look about you, but you're holding a goddamn bullwhip. And like your caption is cage rattler. I'm like, oh, I need to know this woman, definitely. So what's your jam?
Yeah, so that came up. So I had a business coach, and I think like a lot of us who have been trying to find ourselves along the way and trying to reinvent ourselves as things come up. I was trying to create and build a business. And so a business coach was challenging me one day, and she's like, what do you call yourself? I'm like, a leadership consultant, right? Like, I mean, and everybody's a coach. Like when I started coaching, there were very few coaches out there. There were some renowned coaches, like the Tony Robbins of the world, right, but there weren't a lot of coaches. Now, you ask anybody what they do, they're a coach. So I was like, I don't want to say I'm a coach. So I was driving on the road one day and I thought about it. And all of a sudden I just it came up in one of those strokes of genius. I said, I'm a cage rattler. Like, that's what I do. That's what people come to me for, is they come to me because they're trapped in some way of thinking or behaving or feeling some, cacophony of feelings. And they're stuck there and they don't know how to get out. So I go up and I go, hey, guess what? You're in a cage. Did you know you're in a cage? Did you know, like the Hotel California song, you have the key, you could get out. And I just show them the way out. So the bullwhip thing was hilarious because on Facebook, I have a solid, like really committed following. And of people whose weddings I've been in and have never met. And I put out on Facebook one day in classic B form, does anybody have a whip I can borrow? And the feedback was hilarious. So I have a bullwhip, and it is become the whip pictures that I've been, reticent to replace because they're so notable.
But I mean, it's such a good image. And I think, let's talk about cage rattling then for a second. Yeah. So what made me want to have you on, that thing that says, I'm stuck, like, I don't know how to get out of this. And so when we're dealing with a bunch of people who are trying to overcome an anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, these are the things that I focus on for the most part. Social anxiety, GAD, all of those things are mixed in, right? So many people are listening to the message and they get it from a logical standpoint. They even want to do it, even though I'm talking about super scary things like facing fear. But there's a segment of the audience that just feels stuck by their own belief or often lack of belief in themselves.
Right.
Like, they were either taught or they've learned in some way they're not worthy of getting better. They're not capable of getting better. This is pointless. It's fruitless. It's not going to work for me anyway. Right. I'm not good enough. And you seem to speak to that directly, with that rattling, like, no, we're going to shake this up. And I think people need to hear it.
And I think, and I read your book, Risa, I know you have two, but I read the anxiety story. So I know your story. And I was struck by that we both have this approach where it's not about trying to convince ourselves that we're not feeling the fear and anxiety that we're feeling, but actually holding its hand and walking through the fire with it.
Yes.
So when I did my TEDx talk in Newport, Rhode Island a couple of years ago, the imagery that I started with was that I have a superpower. My superpower is I can walk through fire. But here's the thing. Everybody has that superpower. Everybody can walk through fire. And for me, like the book that just published, mine, it was my 6th book. It's called Pain Rebel, was me trying to help people to reassociate with pain in a different way, to see it differently, because we have a really broken relationship to it. And part of that stuckness that you're referring to for people comes back to what I call contracts, which is that when we were young, and I don't know what the age was for particular contracts that are written depending on our history, whether it was traumatic or not. We had different ages that these things occurred, but it was clearly prior to consent or awareness. But we signed these contracts that said, I'm going to believe that I'm incapable. I'm going to believe that the world is scary. I'm going to believe that X, Y, Z, right? And like list them out. And what happens is, because we sign these, and we're like, okay, yep, I'm signing on the dotted line. I'm going to believe this thing. I'm going to be loyal to mom or dad, or to my, my church or my culture, or like whatever it is. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to choose loyalty over joy. Now that I've signed it, everything in the world is designed around reinforcing those ideas and beliefs. Because just like if I looked up a thing on WebMD because I don't know, I had some like stomach discomfort and I was convinced I had testicular cancer. I'm convinced I could prove to you that I have testicular cancer by the list of things, right? I would be able to prove to you because that's like, I'm looking for that evidence. Oh yeah, I do have a little bit of a fever. Oh yeah, I do have a little abdominal swelling, right? Oh my God, it must be, I don't have testicular cancer, right? But in the same way that we look for evidence to confirm something crazy as that, we look for evidence to confirm that we were right to sign those contracts, that we are unworthy, or we are, we do need to be loyal to people who hurt us, or we do need to sacrifice ourselves at the whatever altar it is.
Yeah.
And because we found all this evidence, then we start believing that the evidence is all the evidence there ever could be. And so what I work through in Pain Rebel is getting people to rewrite those contracts. First, to be aware that they even have them to begin with, to articulate what they look like what's kind of the operating, I mean, you're a computer guy, right? What's the operating system that's happening behind all of the choices that we're making day in and day out? And then rewriting those contracts as though we chose the life that we wanted to live versus having somebody else hold the pen.
Yeah, which is super powerful and a huge shift, I'm guessing, tremendous shift for people. So yeah, and so what I wind up finding is that primarily the things that I hear, and it comes out in certain ways. So people start to compare themselves to the people around them. And I'm thankful that I have a very vibrant community around the podcast. And so people get to see each other and they get to interact with each other. The Facebook group is big, it's getting bigger. And invariably somebody, and my heart goes out to this person, will say like, I'm reading, I'm learning, you guys are amazing, you're inspiring, but everybody here is so strong and so brave. Or like people read my book and they're like, oh, you're just so much stronger than me. And I was like, no, I wouldn't have wrote the book if I thought I was special. Like, I want you to know that you are too. And they just have a hard time even imagining. They appreciate the sentiment, but I could feel it's falling on deaf ears. Like, no, you're as strong and brave as anybody else. You just don't know it yet. And they appreciate it, but it's not sinking in for a long time for many people.
Right, because they're stuck in old contracts. Like the people that I coach, we'll have a conversation and they'll tell me about something that went, off the rails, and I'll say, what did you figure out from that? They're like, old contracts. Like they get that just taking the action based on what they would believe could be their new contract. So like I have them imagine this, do some inner child work, which is, I think important for the healing process, which is to say, they believe these terrible things about themselves. But then I say to them, I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine little you, like come up with, whenever your first communion, or, when you're in the Boy Scouts or whatever that cute little image, that adorable you image is.
Right.
Now I want you to imagine you crawling up on your lap and looking little you in the face and saying, you're unworthy. You don't deserve the best life has to offer. You need to allow people to hurt you because that's what you deserve. Like on and on and on. And people are like horrified. I could never do that. But you're doing it every single day, that you sacrifice your life today to be loyal to a contract you don't even remember signing.
Yeah.
Didn't have the authority, the ability, the wherewithal to sign in the first place. So breaking those contracts, I mean, talk about like the strength of that is such a subtle shift, but it's huge, because all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I get to choose this now. Like this doesn't get to be chosen for me. Like I don't have to listen to those voices. I only listen to those voices because they were the voices around me and they seemed right.
Yeah.
And now I realize that they were full of it. And now I need to rewrite them.
And the number of times that I've heard people say things like those are revelations to many people. They suddenly discover, and I've heard people say things like, well, I didn't think I was allowed to do it different. I didn't think I was allowed to make my own decisions. Like they really, truly were conditioned that way, or these, like you said, all contracts, which is super interesting. And you describe it in I love the way you describe it that way. It's very tangible and it's very actionable.
Yeah, because you think of a contract, like everybody's signed a contract before. I mean, most people, right? Like whether it's the contract for your bank account or whatever, you know that you have to sign it. You have to be of age. You have to be of sound mind and body,
right.
therein, you have to put a date on it. But when I say it like that versus like your belief structures or your conditioning, that feels very passive. That sounds very much like there's no, like that's some morass that you're never going to be able to swim out of.
Right.
When you talk about it as contracts, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm ripping those things up. Like
And it's usually, it's a very, I would say unsettling thing when you see people start to make the shift. And I see it every day. I am like fortunate and honored to be able to see that shift. You could see it's a very tentative shift because suddenly it's like, all right, I'm going to rip up the old contracts. I'm going to start to take care of myself. Is this okay? Like it runs counter to everything they've had up to that moment in their life. So it's always that thing where you have to sort of prop people up and say, no, it's okay. You're allowed to do this. It's going to be okay. You might be uncomfortable. You're unsure. You might be afraid. You're going to make some mistakes, but that's cool. It's all right. Should have done that when you were 8. Now you get to do it now. It's okay.
The number one thing that I think is underneath a lot of that behavior, from what I've seen, I used to volunteer in the jail down when I lived in Virginia. And I remember one time, I want to meet this guy again because I want to see where he ended up. I hope it was in good places. But I used to go into the jail myself. I mean, you've seen me, my pictures of me. I'm a small person, you know, and this was in locked facility by myself, like in a room of, 15 inmates and fairly sizable men. And I still was a cage rattler, not surprising. And this guy said, I hate my dad. He's such an SOB. He really messed me up. He spent most of my life in and out of jail, yada, yada, yada. And he's telling this story. And he had also said some things about how his son wasn't talking to him. And, so seeing the multi-generational impact. And I looked at him and I said, so, sounds like your dad was a pretty bad dude. And he said, yeah. I said, when do you think you're going to stop being loyal to him? You could have heard a pin drop, Drew. Like the whole room, like you heard gasps, yeah, right? And then the guy who I said it to, like leaned forward in his chair, like he was about to commit another felony, right? Yeah. And me recipient. And he's like, I'm not, and just railed about how he wasn't loyal. And I said, well, that's interesting because you said that he told you that you were worthless. And he showed you by his behavior, it's nothing different, right? That he didn't value you. And yet you are doing and making all of the same choices that he did. That sounds like loyalty to me. I'm wondering when you're going to start choosing something else. And this guy, like, it took him a second because everybody else heard it because it wasn't them. They weren't in the hot seat, although they saw themselves, all screwed up in that, right? And he like took a minute and it all of a sudden hit him. And on the way out the door, he was weeping, like thanking me because no one had ever confronted him in the way of that kind of a choice. Mm-hmm. Right? Of really facing him instead of having this perpetual bitch session, that he could actually take the reins back, see it differently, and make a completely different life going forward.
You're like my new BFF, I swear to God. So let's talk about that for a second. So at first he jumps off his chair and he probably wants to rip your head off.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I'd like, thank God there were cameras in the room because that would have been like, we wouldn't have been having this conversation. I wouldn't have made it in all those weddings because I wouldn't have survived that particular,
And I get that. So it's so interesting that we're having this conversation now because not 2 hours ago, I talked to another friend of mine who also does a trauma-related podcast, excellent. And he was talking about sometimes the gut reaction, because he's a no-nonsense dude. He's going right at it like you do, right? And and I get this reaction too, when you confront somebody with, well, no, I can't go to work. No, you choose not to go to work because of how you feel. Sometimes there's that thing that says, oh, I never thought of it that way. But sometimes there is, you are a horrible human being. You are a fraud. You clearly don't know what this is. You should be in jail for telling people stuff like that. I mean, you experienced that in the prison.
Oh, yeah.
Right, in the prison. He just wanted to go right at you. But sometimes, this is the reason why I love your approach so much, the willingness to confront that as opposed to just talking around it, the never-ending bitch session, like you just said, is so counterproductive. And I need to circle back just for a couple minutes back, because I know that people who are listening right now, who listen to me, their head exploded about 7 or 8 minutes ago when you mentioned inner child.
Yeah. Oh, because you don't like that stuff.
Wow, you're fast. No, but I have to explain that though. I have to explain that. So, and this is, and it's so hard to put this into thing, and we can talk about this a little bit. Yeah. When Bridget says, talk to your inner child, do some inner child work, I never say that that's wrong, but that is part of the process. So if you are listening, and I'm sorry to hijack your conversation, but I need to address the audience.
No, do it.
if you are listening and you're wondering like, oh, what is it? Oh, your friend Bridget likes inner child, so then it's okay. But when I say it, it's wrong. Well, your inner child is not keeping you from going to the supermarket, being afraid of a panic attack, being afraid of your own body, learning those things that say, I have learned to interpret panic as danger, has nothing to do with your inner child. So your inner child issues may have been the match that lit the fire, but when you blow out the match, the fire's still burning. So we're trying to put out the fire, but then you need to also do this inner child work. If it needs to be done, it has to be done. And sometimes the inner child work is an obstacle before you can do the work that I'm talking about. So it does actually fit together. I swear she's right.
Thank you. I love hearing that. Record that. It's recorded. I'm so excited.
It's recorded. You share it. Go ahead.
So what I talk about is so many of our trappings we're stuck in the wrong time zone. So most of the time when you're talking about inner child work, what you're talking about is going back to the past, which is a time zone. When you're stuck in anxiety, you're trapped in the future.
Yes.
You're not in the current time zone. The only place your true power, I mean, the chunk, the bulk, the excess of your power is in right now, which is why when you talk about in the book, like how you took those steps, you're like, and I went 50 miles and I went 100 miles. Like it was in the present. I mean, yeah, you had to clean up some of the nonsense you were dragging along in your big Samsonite from the past. But you had to be in the present even to do that. But you had to focus your efforts in the present. And the whole inner child work and any of the other work, you got to clean up some of that because you don't want to be dragging it around because it's heavy and it's exhausting and all of that. And it's where some of the broken thinking is coming from that's making you believe that you can't do anything in the present. But the only moment that you have any power over is what you do right now.
Yeah.
Like Will Smith had this beautiful thing in, I think it's called After Earth. And he was talking to his actually real life son, but also played his son in the movie about fear and talking about the fact that fear is an illusion because it's trying to confront a moment that has not presented itself. The only thing that you can do is the thing that is right there with you and in front of you. You can prepare for a future which may bring something that would cause fear, but you cannot address a moment you haven't yet reached. The only moment you can address is the present moment. So I think our thinkings about this are very aligned because I coach and I was trained as a therapist, but sitting and talking about the past, like my least favorite moment when I go see a new therapist is the first session.
We have to.
Oh my God. I swear to God, if I could capture those hours back, because it's hours, because the last time I did it, I swear to God, Drew, I picked up Little Landslides, which is my memoir.
Yeah.
I handed it to the therapist. I said, I'll see you next week. Like, I'm all done. Like, I don't want to, I don't need to be there anymore. Like, I was there.
Yeah.
You can catch up. You can go watch the movie, right? But I'd like to be talking about now. And that's the only place I can actually do anything.
Yeah, that's a super powerful message. So that combination of, look, there are ways that you can address the past. And if the past is an anchor around your neck and it is stopping you from doing the work today that I talk about all the time, like, listen to Dr. B here. Like, there's things that need to be confronted, and it's often not gentle. Sometimes it's a little bit rattling and jarring and unsettling, and a lot of stuff is going to come up. Right. And you have to face some fear even with that, but it's super important to do it. So, I mean, I got to believe that you have found a tremendous amount of transformation in people who have bought into that, ripped up the old contracts, however scary that may be, and started to be able to come into the present and start to change their life that way.
I think the pivotal piece, because we're always works in progress, right? We're always like, I find myself sometimes, I'm like, oh my God, that's an old contract. You know what I mean? Like I could actually hear like the ghost booing in the room somewhere, coming back to haunt me. So we're always, we're constant works in progress. And, and you were, honest about the fact you're like, I'm not anxiety free. I'm just not dominated. My life isn't written about this, but I think the same thing goes with our evolution. So I think that not only do people see this transformation because now they think about how they got here differently and how they can get out differently, but they recognize that if they choose to stay, they've chosen to stay. So, I have this mantra that I say all the time in I teach in a graduate program, and they say it almost like parroting it back to me, like the clap that you hear when you're in kindergarten, like, are you listening thing, right?
Yeah.
But I say awareness equals choice and choice equals power. Never power over, always power from within. But awareness equals choice and choice equals power. So when I have these transformational conversations with my clients, I've expanded their awareness. They can't go back. They can't not know that that's there. And they can't not know that they have a choice. So they can choose from that moment forward to be miserable.
Yeah.
They can. They absolutely can. Or they can choose a different road. But now they are accountable to themselves for that choice, which is before we had the conversation, they didn't even recognize they had it.
Do you ever run into a situation, and we'll try and cut this off soon because otherwise we're just going to go for 3 hours, I guarantee.
Can we?
Oh wait, sure, we'll go as long as you want. I got nothing going on. That's not true, but it's fine. But anyway, do you ever run into a situation where somebody is confronted with that now? Like all of a sudden they can't unsee it, like you said. Now you have, this is now you now must make a choice. And you could choose to not do this, and that's fine. And I would honor that choice if you pick it because it's your choice. Yeah. But do you ever find that you have to work or wait for somebody to understand that dropping that right in their lap, right, is not a bad thing? It's actually an empowering thing? Because I found that people will get really ruffled when it's like, well, what do you mean I choose to be this way? No. I'm not saying that you want to be this way, but at some point you do have to understand that you do have if you don't want to see it that way, you are leaving all of your power on the floor.
Right.
And take it. No.
Yeah. Where you are is a collection of your choices. Like I've been saying this to my kids since they were little. I said, you always have a choice. And my sassy daughters, always come back to me with something.
You have sassy daughters? I don't believe
I know, shocking. But they think they're like, oh, we got one for what if, and the first one I got was, what if somebody has a gun to your head? I said, not good choices, still a choice.
Right.
Never not. And having met Holocaust survivors in person and spoken to them, I can say that is the indomitable human spirit, that you always have a choice. And even if you were conditioned to believe that the victim role suited you better than any other, it simply is a role. It's not yours. And it doesn't mean that you weren't victimized. Let's get this clear. But being victim means handing over your power to other people. Somebody asked me, if you could have any wish in the world, if you could change the world in any way, how would you change it? And I said, I would want people to see the beauty, breadth, and depth of their own power so that they stopped trying to take it from others or give it away.
Yeah, just let that sit there for a second, because that's really, 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 really good. We are quite aligned. We are quite aligned.
Or Disney.
Well, either one or the other, right? Exactly. Either want you to know that or have an unlimited supply of pepperoni pizza.
Right, but here's the thing.
They're both really good.
Yeah, pepperoni pizza I can go with, maybe calzones, but Disney, you can't do it with COVID anyway. The thing that I'm talking about, you can do anywhere, anytime. It's like,
Yeah. And I think being confronted with that, like, if I am going to actually change things, I'm going to overcome my anxiety disorder, and I have to get rid of this past stuff that's keeping me from doing the work.
Right.
Then understanding that you're making choices all the time, and there's tremendous power in that. Yeah. I think some people are a little bit afraid to pick that up. They're afraid of their own power.
Yeah. And you read Little Landslides, my story about rising up through trauma. And so, I know of which I speak. Right.
Yes.
About inner child work, about being traumatized and all that stuff. And a lot of people that I've worked with, and I'm sure a lot of people that you worked with, have the story, what I call in Pain Rebel, your pain resume, which is all the things that you've accumulated over time that give you the rationale to be suffering the way that you're currently suffering. We all have them. We all have a pain resume. Oftentimes when we first meet somebody, we share it, or we first start dating or whatever, we go through our little pain resume. And there's beauty in that, because it's honoring experiences and honoring our strength and how we got here, and that we're still breathing and moving and doing whatever it is that we're doing, limited or otherwise. But I think what it fails to do is to cut the proverbial umbilical cord between us and the suffering that someone else put us through.
Right.
Because every single time we suffer today because of something that someone else did to us in the past, they keep punishing us and they're not even here to do it. And for me, being the rebellious person that I am, I say F that. They don't get to have my tomorrows and my todays because they already took my yesterdays. I can't get them back.
Yeah.
And for me, every time that kind of patterning wins in my life, I recognize that I just gave them another day of my joy and my happiness and my beauty. And that angers me. And I talk a lot about how you can use rage and forgiveness to heal everything. And that angers me because I'm like, oh, absolutely not. That will not be present in my life one more day.
Yeah, it's not okay. It's not okay. And that component of anger is something that we talk about a lot in my community too. Like sometimes anger is a really useful thing. And I find that a lot of people, even in the context of the mechanics of anxiety that I'm always talking about, sometimes they have to reach the point where they are just fit to be tied, just pissed off beyond belief before they'll take that leap of faith to do the exposure work, to do the hard work. And I think maybe the same thing holds true with doing the past trauma work.
Rage is beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Rage
so good.
Rage, the feeling of rage, not the expression of it, not the violating of another human being or another thing or culture or community or anything else. But the feeling of rage is the most beautiful emotion aside from love, because it actually is love. Because what rage is doing is saying from the human spirit, I have been injured and I deserved better. It is the soul screaming out for validation for its own hurt. And that is beautiful. Like I work with trauma survivors and others, and I say it all the time, rage, beautiful. Never seen anything more beautiful than that, because it is like, you know, for people who, especially who are injured at ages or in spaces where they had no ability to get past that, to change things, to protect themselves. It is the protector. It is the hero standing forward and going, absolutely never again, right? And so the harnessing the power of rage in recovery of any kind is such a power move.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Like, it's, for me, it is one of the purest expressions of one's own power and control. And it has nothing to do with anyone else walking the planet. It is entirely an internalized thing. Like, yeah, I would agree with you 100%. Like, there's no pure expression of strength in that, to me.
Yeah,
but,
and self-love.
Yeah, but again, qualified. You know, the acting out of rage against someone else. No, not okay. Not okay.
No, but the feeling of rage, and that, you know, I talk a lot in my work about, you know, that we're responsible for only three things in the world: our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors.
Yeah. And
it's recognizing the thought that leads to the feeling of rage is beautiful. Yeah. Right. It's the standing up for oneself. Then moving from the feeling to the action then becomes you transferring your pain to someone else, and that's not okay.
Very good. Very good. All right. We've been at this for a while. We should probably wrap it up.
I lost track of time.
Yeah. Yeah. We could, you know, I would love to do a few more of these with you if you're willing to do it. And I know people are going to have questions for you. Tell us where they can find you.
So you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Bridget Cooper, DrBridgetCooper. Facebook, also Dr. B, or just direct my, you can be one of the people that I won't remember whether or not we met at a wedding or, you know, never met at all. Bridget Cooper, or you can email me anytime or look me up on my website, drbridgetcooper.com, and I'm Bridget at drbridgetcooper.com.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So if you do connect with Dr. Bridget, just tell her that she was in your wedding.
I know. And I'll be like,
oh my God, be all good.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that I, you know, my brain injury. So that would have been so much fun. They can play all sorts of tricks on me. Your listeners can have a blast.
Which is amazing. Can we talk about it for just 30 seconds or 60 seconds before we really wrap it up? You're very open about that. So you were in a horrific car accident not that long ago.
2 years.
2 years, right? It's a recent past for the most part. And I would have had no idea if you did not tell me that you are dealing with a traumatic brain injury. Yeah. Like, So I want you, anybody who just listened to the last 35 minutes of like just pure fire coming out of this little woman right here, just love it. Like, understand that this is somebody who is actually recovering from a true traumatic brain injury now.
Yeah, and there's no recovery. So
adapting, changing, relearning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's no joke. It's 25-point IQ loss. Persistent symptoms like day in and day out. Like right now I'm talking to you, and as you've noticed, because you can see my video, I've been drinking constantly during our chat, and I also have some, Trident, you're welcome for the endorsement, for gum, because I constantly have to be chewing gum or drinking or eating, which is great for the figure. Because I have constant nausea, I have, hearing disturbances, I have visual disturbances, all sorts of stuff. So, and it's one of those things where I say to the universe, okay, could you just like pull off the throttle a little bit? Like, I honestly, I think my list is long enough. Like, do I need to now stand for this? Like, okay, well, you've stood for trauma survivors and blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to do TBI. And so whatever the universe has in store for me next, I knock on wood. I don't want to know. I don't want to. But I think it shows that you can look on the outside far different than you feel on the inside. And unless people are honest about sharing that inner experience, we can get really confused about what somebody else is really going through. And there's this, catchphrase, don't compare your insides to somebody else's outsides. And you were talking about the other day, like the Facebook pretty thing, of looking perfect and not being anywhere near that, and how disorienting that is for people. So that's one of the reasons why I speak out about it, is because people look at me and they're like, oh, you're fine. I'm like, I absolutely am not. So if you're suffering too, I feel you, because I'm out there not showing it so much, but certainly experiencing it.
Yeah. And I think you are a really good example of somebody who has been just hit with a tremendous amount of adversity. I mean, if you read Little Landslides, it's a really powerful book. Yeah. And, especially the way you wrote it. And then the story that you told me of how you had to finish Pain Rebel in such a methodical, dealing with this injury, and you had to finish writing a book while you're doing it.
Oh, that was so much fun.
Yeah. But I think it's perspective too. So those of us who are out there and struggling with like, I feel a little dizzy today, my anxiety is acting up. This is the worst thing in the world. I would like to direct your attention to Dr. B here.
Yeah. And there's a worse thing than mine, right? And worse thing than that person that I'm comparing him to. We all have our own inner struggles, but the point is that there isn't anything that we can, other than flying, and even that we can try to figure that out somehow. We can do anything it is that we decide we want to do if we can figure out how to ask for the support, look for the resources, investigate the options, look for help. Like, I didn't do that alone. I wasn't, sitting in a room by myself figuring this out. I was reaching out for help. And that's what you're doing by being, doing this podcast and having your social media presence, is helping people walk down the road so they're not alone, because we're just not.
Very good. Very good. All right, you guys, connect with Dr. B. She's definitely worth following. I will put all of your links in the show notes. So go to theanxiousstreet.com/115. This is episode 115, I believe. So that'll get you right to this one. Find all the links. It'll be all good. Thanks, Bridget. I really appreciate it. We'll do it again. Yes?
That was a pleasure. Can't wait.
All right. See you later. Let me end the recording in that awkward way. There you go. Wait.
Somebody told me that you do or die, but I believe all you can do is try. And as the city stands 10 stories high, I'm gonna live my life. It's all around you, you can breathe it.